Hello and welcome to this very special edition of CCC Talks, where we're focusing on our recent CCC Digital Skills Report. Now, it gives me great pleasure to welcome back two of our previous guests, Elaine Montilla and Dave Jones. And Elaine, you're Assistant Vice President for Information Technology and CIO at University of New York and founder of 5X Minority. And Dave, you're CEO and founder of Instinctive Solutions. So thank you. Welcome, first of all, and thank you for coming back. We must have done a good job the first time round on CCC Talks.
Great I must have behaved the last time that you invited me again.
Thanks, Lynn. And as I said, it's great to have you both here. And as I said, to drill in on the digital skills report that we've released just recently, an interesting one to think about throughout today's conversation is, have things changed as well? So we'll have a think about that. But to get us started, David, I wanted to talk about digital transformation reality check, something you spoke about before. And I think it's really good, a reality check. Let's have a look. And you said, in order to be successful, digital transformation has to lead to actual change. I love that. Something has to change, otherwise it's not successful. And you went on to say, change in how we work, change in the tools we use, change in what we do. And you said, and this is great, in your experience, only 20% of digital transformation is the software and the digital tech, 30% relating to process, and the remaining 50% relating to people. That really stuck with me. But to start us off, David, is this still valid? And then second question, do actual leaders get that and understand that split?
I think it is still valid, Mark. And we talked about that just as COVID, or pretty much in the middle of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think at the time, people were being forced to do digital transformation and maybe think a little bit more than they would do about the technology side, the software side, the IT side, because they had to.
Yes.
I think what we've seen in the preceding the subsequent 12 months is, all right, the tech's in. How do we actually make the stuff work? And what processes do we need to follow to actually figure out how to use this stuff remotely? Because a lot of the tools weren't set up and designed to be used remotely. And then I think we've finally come to the final part, to the most important part for me of digital transformation now, which is the people. And not enough time and effort and emphasis was placed on the people during that rapid shift to remote working. Ironically, now that we are starting to look at what the impact it's got on the people and how we actually service the people, they're all upping and moving back to hybrid working now, as opposed to being entirely remote. They're all sort of shifting back, and we got no idea where they are. So we've now got an IT challenge again, in that we're not just moving a desktop box and putting it in a home office. We've got to enable this new way of working. So it's an ever-changing dynamic, but I still believe fervently that the IT is not the important piece here. It's the people with the process to enable those people to do their job right.
I think that's interesting, and we've come from an absolute state of change to now a new state of change. But you said it's just change. Which so it doesn't stop. That's interesting. And Elaine, do you see that same thing in the organizations that you're working with and the folks you're working with as well? Is it the same type of challenge that we're faced today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was so happy that Dave mentioned people, because I've been talking about this for a while. We tend to forget about the people, and they're the last piece of the puzzle. I think something that I notice a lot is that we are not empowering the people to work in new ways. Everything is changing, but sometimes management continues to view the work the same way that it was, 3 or 4 years ago. And so that needs to change. The second part that I notice a lot is that we need to move away from one-way communication. This whole notion of sending emails and sending a notice, we need to empower people and have two-way communication so that their voices are also heard, so that we have mechanisms for feedback, so that they can have input into some of the decisions that we're making, not all of them, but at least some of them. And that's something I try to do every day.
I think that's so interesting, where a lot of the times an email is just a broadcast. How many people are put in the copy field, the CC field, just for, it's almost cover cover myself here. Well, I informed everybody, but nobody's informed. It's just a broadcast. And then, as you said, email isn't quite a voice, and it's about getting that voice of what are you communicating? What is the message? Who are you talking to? And I think it goes back to the good old-fashioned days of the phone. Pick up the phone and talk.
Yeah, and at the end, no one reads the emails. Something that we started doing a few years ago was a planning and assessment process where the people presenting projects needed to meet with the other teams and get feedback from the other teams before the project is presented to me. I think when you get them involved, it's way easier to even move the digital transformation forward because they feel that they were a part of it and they are being left out. And it's like the last thought that comes to our minds is, oh, okay, what do we do with the people now?
Yeah, I think as you both said, it's people come last, but really people should come first in all these. But it's easier to get in the new tech. And as you were talking there, Dave, I was thinking about this company, if you go back a number of years ago, buying in a massive machine for the factory, but not knowing, then scratching their heads going, well, how is this going to can the beans or turn out the bicycles, or what's going to happen there? Shouldn't we have trained the people?
Yeah, it's true. And if you think there's a famous business guru, Simon Sinek, right? He says, start with why. I mean, it's a well-respected book.
Yes.
It's absolutely true with digital transformation. And, why did they put that machine into the factory? No one really thought about it. It was just the latest thing to buy and to put in there. And that's so much of the time what happens with all of these pieces. And I think just to come to something that Elaine just said, we do need to empower the people to work with slightly different tools. Yes. But we also need to put the guardrails on there, right? Because it's very easy if you've got messaging services to be online 24 hours a day and to know when to stop. At least when we were in the office, we had those sort of time constraints. Home at 6 o'clock. That's difficult, and that's something that we need to spend a lot more time thinking about.
I think that's true. And in some companies I've been involved in recently, I have seen that in email messages. Just because I've sent you this message at an out of hours time doesn't mean you have to respond. Please respond in your in hours time. I thought, okay, that's starting to be a change. I've not seen it in a lot of organizations because there's still that I've sent you a message at 11 p.m. I want something back, and you're always on. But as we see in France and a few at least other European countries, this right to disconnect is starting to come in. And I think that's only fair. That's relevant. But again,
it'd be great if your iPhone could identify the fact that email says don't open me and don't at 11 o'clock at night, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and then it goes back to that word Elaine said, empower people not to answer the email or not to feel obliged. But again, it's a challenge. It's a challenge coming up. We'll come back to people that are so important in this recipe. Now, we did find some good, interesting facts. I'll give you one here. 78% of those that we asked said digital upskilling is part of their organizational strategy. So almost 80% are saying it's in the strategy. The people at the top are saying, let's do this, okay? However, 85% of respondents believe that there's still a digital skills gap in their organization. So while it's embedded in their strategy to let's upskill, the people on the ground are saying, we're not being upskilled. There's a big gap there. Elaine, do you think people are being upskilled quick enough and fast enough to close this gap? Or is this representative of the numbers that we see?
Yeah, it is unfortunately representative. And I can tell you that technology is changing way faster than we can keep up.
Yeah.
It's just impossible. And, in my personal experience, I'm seeing that struggle when it comes to cybersecurity, for example. It's always we are behind them. We have a patch. We're always one step behind. And not only that, but even if you have the tools and the resources so that you can scan the network and know what's happening, at the end you need people to implement everything, all the recommendations that come from this amazing, expensive tool that you just bought. And for every one person, there are two jobs out there. So I'm losing people. I'm sure I'm not the only one. There are so many job openings out there, and I work in education, and so it doesn't pay the same way as a corporate would pay. And that has been a challenge. Every year, Training, it's the one item where I would not budge on that. I need to make sure I have enough funding for training. But we are so busy doing. We are so busy doing that we don't have enough time for training unless you do it on the weekend or your spare time. And that's a big challenge for a lot of us.
I get that is, as we said there, even if it's baked in strategy, it's how do you get it done if that's one of those barriers, because everybody's just getting busier. All these productivity tools are making us busier as well. And then, do you see that as well, or are you seeing anything different?
I'm seeing exactly the same thing, Mark, but I'm going to be slightly controversial. I actually think the people that need upskilling more than anybody else are the people setting the strategy. Because it's great to say, oh yeah, we need to upskill everybody. But actually they haven't got a clue what they're upskilling their people to do if they haven't been upskilled themselves. So I think it starts at the top and it then has to filter down. And why should all of your staff go upskill if you're not prepared to do it yourself?
I think that's so interesting. And again, it goes back to, I think, where we've come from in the past, that may have been the case where we had that hierarchy and it filters down. But as we flatten out organizations, we tend to lose a lot of that. As we strip out the middle management, we're not mentoring anymore. We're not helping pull up the next generation because we don't expect people to do a career in a single organization anymore. And maybe all of that's come into the mix and affecting some of those. But I think equally, as you said, those at the top should know what they're setting out strategy-wise, so should actually understand this. And again, I've done some let's say interviews and various assessments of various parts of organizations, and I do find what you're saying, Dave, as well, that even at the top it's, well, we set out the strategy, but do you understand what this is or what it entails? Well, we don't really, but we think we got to do it, or we've been told to do it by advisors or consultants or whatever that input is into their thinking.
Well, I think if you also look at, sorry, Elaine, if you also look at the skills that we're trying to train people in, the new type of skills that we need to function in the modern environment, they're not necessarily hard skills, they're soft skills, right? So they're communication, they're how to deal with people, they're how to work remotely. Those are equally relevant, if not more relevant, for that leadership as they are for people on the shop floor, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, Dave. I don't remember where, but I read a report a few weeks ago where they shared that managers moving forward, this is the future of work, the skills that we need the most are 1, coaching, and 2, mentoring. And so who is preparing our managers now to make sure that this is in place? And there are even companies that have 2 sets of managers, one for the technical side of the house and another one for the coaching and mentoring and reviews. And it's amazing, but I do see that happening more and more.
Yeah, I think we've lost that as we flattened the organizations down and stripped out, because years ago, again, in career organizations, you would get coaching and mentoring, and those managers going up would learn how to coach and mentor the people behind them to make sure that there's an upcoming, cohort that can take over later on. But as careers then hop between jobs, and that's the norm, I think we have lost a bit of that, and it's challenging to get it back because mentoring is not easy. It's not an easy skill. And then, Elaine, go back to what you said. Everybody's too busy. So if I'm too busy, I'm not going to mentor, or I'll just pretend to mentor, tick the box, HR happy, nothing has changed.
And something that sometimes we don't think about is that the faculty members, a lot of them have never taught a course remotely. And so overnight, when the pandemic hit, not only did we have to put together the tools that they needed so that they can teach the course remotely, but they also needed to learn how to do it. And so the Teaching and Learning Center at the Graduate Center had to quickly create workshops so that we can teach them how to remotely teach a course and how to follow up with the students and how to keep up with exams and papers. And so that was a big change for them too.
And I think, sorry, Mark, just to jump in there, I experienced remote schooling as a parent through COVID. And I think, Elaine, to back up or to add on to what you've just said, using the tools is one piece, right? What we experienced was very different teaching styles. So we had teachers that could adequately use the Teams environment that they were set up with, but they hadn't changed their lesson plan. So halfway through the lesson plan, the kids had to go off and do practical exercises with what would have been the teaching assistants in the classroom, but it was with the parents at home, whereas other teachers had adapted that teaching style to realize that they had to be much more engaging, much more on all of the time. Sorry to cut you off, Mark.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. Yeah, again, I'd echo that as well in what I've seen. I think that ties up with what Elaine is saying, that a complete change for an industry, the academia industry across global, some successful, some not, some willing to adopt it, some not. I personally know some people in that space. Some took to it really well and some really struggled, and how they balance it. They all had the same tools, whether it was Teams or Zoom. So that wasn't the problem. The tech wasn't the problem anymore. It's our application of it, and how do you keep people engaged. We have a few more findings on the online stuff. We'll tie that back in now in a moment when we come to it. But we also asked, is digital transformation transforming? So transforming means changing. So is it changing anything? And interestingly, 52% of folks said that they believe within the next 3 years, some part of the organization will have fundamentally changed the way it operates. Now that sounds good, because of the use of digital technologies and services. And many say the change is happening now. 22% were unsure, and 22% said they expect no change from the adoption of digital services. What does that 22%? 22% saying that they expect no change occurring from the adoption of digital technologies. Does that surprise you, or is that madness, or what do you think?
I think that 22% will be out of business in 18 months' time, quite frankly, if they got their head in the sand enough to think that they can avoid going digital.
Yeah,
I think they're dreaming, quite frankly. I'm surprised that only 52% think that it will affect them in the next 3 years. I think most of those, it's here now, right? This isn't something that's going away. We're not going back to full-time office working. Yeah. We need to embrace digital transformation in whatever shape that means.
Yes.
And if you don't, you're going out of business.
You're going out of business, yeah. I think that's true. And Elaine, you work with a lot of minorities in the workplace as well. Do you think minority cohorts get left behind with this amount of change happening? As Dave said, look, it's not 50%, it's 100%, it's happening everywhere. You'll get left behind. What does that mean for minority groups in organizations?
Well, it can make things worse for them because they are already being left behind today, right? They're being left behind due to outdated hiring practices. They're being left behind because of bias in the workplace, bias when it comes to performance annual reviews. And so something that I think is good to mention is that a lot of the people from underrepresented groups don't have the same resources that others do. A lot of us don't have access to a mentor or even a sponsor in the workplace. And even worse than that, and we saw this in education, a lot of us don't have access to broadband technology at home or even a laptop. I had students who were sharing one laptop per household. And so the dad needed to work, and then I needed to take a class. And so luckily we had laptops, and we were able to create a loan program so that they can have them. And so this is only going to make things worse.
That's interesting, as you said, that some people don't even have broadband or basic equipment to partake in this digital change that's happening globally. It's very hard to get your head around that, but that is reality, unfortunately. Yeah. And going back to the hybrid working, so we've got this view now of hybrid working, which is in place, and also the great resignation. All these folks that said, oh, because of hybrid working, we can leave our jobs or take up different jobs or go to California and work on the beach or something like that. So interestingly, 75% of organizations say that hybrid working will remain in place. So that's fine. So 75-80% would probably be the norm. But now we're seeing a return to work, and a lot of organizations saying get back into the office, especially in public sector. We no longer want you working at home. We'll pretend we're doing hybrid working, but let's get back. Elaine, is this a sign of going backwards? That's not going forward now. Is there a challenge in that? Are we going backwards with that kind of view? And what's the impact?
We're definitely going backwards. And just to share a tweet that someone shared with me last week, there was a CEO who was watching companies and waiting to see which ones were asking their employees to come back 100%. And they were being targeted because they knew that they would eventually leave that job. And so what's the impact? I think we're feeling it right now. We're losing a lot of employees. And I can tell you that any company that tells their employees, you need to be back 100% tomorrow, a lot of them will leave because there are so many options. One of the things that we got from COVID is understanding that we are all capable, more than capable, of doing the job we need to do remotely. And so if flexibility is not included in the culture moving forward, we're just like Dave said, we're just going to be left behind.
Yeah, I like what you said there, though. We are capable. Again, go back to the person. We are capable of doing the job. The office wasn't the thing that made us do our job well. Maybe it helped with some of the social structures and things like that. I have a question in a moment about how it may not help so much. But I think that's so interesting. We're so capable. Dave, from your view, obviously, you said you're a big advocate of hybrid working now and said, look, it has worked. We've proven it to work. But as Elaine said, are we at this great resignation, or are we at this great retention? Where on one hand, we have companies looking at who's saying go back to work, I'll poach those staff because we have then the hybrid working. I'm confused. Are we at this great resignation, great retention, or are we somewhere in the middle of this and it will work itself out?
Well, I think the key word is hybrid, right? But not in the way that we've been talking about it so far. So we've been talking about it in terms of location. Actually, I think the important way to look at hybrid moving forward is in terms of role. So people have realized, to Elaine's point, they're very, very capable. Yeah. And actually, if you're in a job where you're doing maybe 10% of what you like and 90% of what you have to do, there are opportunities out there to go and do 100% of what you like for 10 different companies. Yes. And control your own destiny and reshape the way that you're doing it. So retention is going to be a huge problem unless organizations actually rethink the way that they structure their work, and it's partly about the geography and the office. We talked about staffing and training earlier on. A lot of middle managers in the corporates that we work with still think that people need to be in the office from 9 until 5 to get a job done. It's not about the quality of work. It's not about what they're doing. It's about the fact that they're there. Employees realize that's garbage, and they're voting with their feet, right? Yeah. The great resignation, there's a whole load of people out there. There's not a skill shortage. There's an understanding shortage in the recruiters and the organizations that are trying to fill roles that don't work in today's environment.
I think that's so interesting. Roles that don't work in today's environment, and the environment significantly changed in the last couple of years. I think going back, Elaine, to what you were saying earlier about hiring from a minority perspective and some of the challenges that they have, I have seen recently that some of the AI that's applied to recruitment online can really pick up on things that just discount people, not because of their ability and the past achievements, but just because of a word or a sentence or a missed couple of months or whatever that is in a CV. I think that's detrimental to companies hiring the right people, especially in minority groups.
Yeah, and something that I wanted to mention is that I think we need to move away from this notion of one size fits all. There isn't one solution. There are some jobs where you should come to the office because it's easier. There are some times where, I know myself when I need to go into the office. I don't need someone to tell me. And so I'm not saying here, forget it and let everyone do whatever they want. We're actually capable of understanding when we need to go into the office. There are benefits from going into the office and meeting with our teams and having that, the culture, collaboration that's needed. But going back to what you just said, listen, the people that are programming this technology, they have their own bias and they're adding that into AI. And so that's affecting a lot of the hiring that we wish we saw more of in terms of having minorities to fill the roles.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that. So we're at this kind of mix, the great resignation feeding the great retention as well. I have seen in some tech companies recently, the way they're trying to retain is actually just increasing salaries. So just throwing money at the problem and benefits trying to do it. That won't last forever, and it's not sustainable over a longer period of time.
Well, it makes me laugh, Mark. I've seen a lot of job adverts for remote working, and I've been an advocate for remote working for a long time. Yes. I love the adverts that say remote working within 30 miles of Philadelphia. It's like, We need you in the office 3 days a week, but 3 days a week, but you can work remotely for 2. People just don't get it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's as you said, we live in interesting times and changing times. An interesting thing we found as well is 32% of organizations say the CIO is driving transformation initiatives. I thought that was a bit low, 32% in the CIO. And what we found was 39% say that their digital project team is actually responsible for driving the digital initiative. I just asked both of you, someone can jump in there, Elaine or David. What do you think of those facts? Are they strange?
I don't think either of those groups are driving the initiative. I think they're hanging on to the steering wheel, trying to get control back of the boat.
Right. You think they've lost control?
I think they're barely hanging on. I think COVID threw such a curveball in that they are struggling to get back on top of things. And even if they think they have all the systems that they put in, they put them in without the due care and attention that they would have put them in with 6 months prior to COVID. So there's a whole heap of compliance issues and process issues and people issues that are about to bite them on the backside.
So you think we're going to see, actually that's interesting, a huge amount of compliance issues internally and then externally, and then people issues coming at us from as we come out of this COVID state, and will change, as you said, those numbers there significantly, probably make them even worse. And from your perspective, Elaine, as well, are you seeing that, who is driving the digital initiatives in the groups you're dealing with and the organizations you see and who you see coming through academia?
Recently, COVID drove the whole thing. It's like a big truck that just came through. You would not believe the number of years that I've been advocating for remote work.
Yes.
No one listens unless something dramatic happens. And I can tell you that the biggest problem we're going to have is all the silos that we have in place. I have a group who wants to do something and another group who thinks they have it, but they're not communicating with each other. And if we don't communicate and have more collaboration, everything we're doing now is just like Dave said, in a few months, we're going to be going nuts. And so removing the silos and increasing communication and collaboration is what's going to help us.
And that's easy. We just installed Teams and Zoom, and sure, we've just increased collaboration and communication, haven't we?
Yes.
As you both said, I'll be shot as the CIO. I wouldn't retain that job. As you both said earlier, it's not as simple as that. It's the impact on people, it's the mentoring, it's the coaching. Not everybody knew how to work or learn or even upskill. I have a question coming up for you on that in a moment on how we did over the COVID period as well. And as you said, David, like coming out of the COVID period, even these findings again, it's good to look at them and say, well, how do they apply now and have things change? And if they have, well, what does that mean?
Well, listen, what's the point of having all of these collaboration tools when you don't do anything about it afterwards? Why would I create open office hours so that my staff can come in and talk to me and then not do anything about the things that they're sharing with me?
Yes.
So it's like half the job, but then we forget that there is another half where we actually need to demonstrate that we're listening and their voices matter. So we need to do more of that.
That important skill of listening. Yeah. Sorry, Dave, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think we've almost flipped as well. There's been an emphasis on over collaboration as well. So we've overcooked the egg to a degree, or the duck to a degree, right? We're all having 8 or 9 meetings a day.
Yes.
Why on earth are we having 8 or 9 meetings a day? We've never had that before. It's almost as if, I'm working remotely. I have to talk to somebody because otherwise I'll go insane. And all right, there is an element there, but it's about figuring out what's important, whether that meeting could have been done using a communication channel, a messenger app, whether it could have been via an email, or whether you actually should be communicating. And all of the politics of Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, right? Everybody comes on, everybody says hi. 3 people are on mute. You go at the end of it, you wave at the end of it. You never waved when you left the meeting room.
I remember that. Yeah.
Why is this so different? We just need to figure out how to do it effectively, right?
And it goes back to, as you said, figuring out, learning how to do this in a different environment with different tools, and having the, I guess, the sense or the empowerment to say, I don't need to be on calls all the time to feel I'm doing work. I should be able to do the work that I'm here to do, just in a different space. And when I need to have that meeting, we have these. So we're over collaborating, Dave, I think is what you're saying there in some instances, which I think is interesting. And Elaine, with that big move to Teams and Zooms and all this collaboration and over collaboration, a particular question for you. I wanted to ask, focusing on women from an inclusivity perspective, did that move help level up the playing field? Because we know there can be a lot of politics and work, it can be macho dominated and things like that. And women can, in some cases, feel like the minority, won't split hairs over that. Did this move to Teams and Zooms kind of put everybody in the same situation, communicating in the same way, working in the same way, or not, from what you've seen?
Absolutely not. I can tell you that it is a great advantage to have flexibility for women to be able to stay home, to be able to do some things. But the problem that we're having is that even while women are working from home, their home duties did not go away. And they are expected to do those while they're working at the same time. And so that's one of the issues. The second one is that I don't know there, but here in the US, we don't have access to affordable childcare. And so, like Dave was saying earlier, now because there was a COVID case last week, my child moved to remote and remote environment, and now I need to help. I need to help with the laptop setup, with the homework, with the connectivity. And who's doing that? It's usually moms. It's no one else. It's usually moms. And so when you think about working from home, men would usually, I don't like to generalize, so I would never do that, but men usually will have an office space and they would go in and close the door and have a meeting and nothing happens. Women do not have access to that. When something comes up, we need to be there to take care of it. And if the dog is barking, we need to stop what we're doing and take care of that. And so it's not the same. And it can affect us in a negative way, especially because of the networking and the fact that we're not in there to have those conversations that happen, the meeting that happens before the meeting. So there are other ways that negatively impacts women and minorities, definitely.
It's interesting, And Dave, do you think this remote working has helped level this political landscape of the office? Not for men and women, but just in general, the politics that go on. Has it changed, or is it still happening, but just via Zoom and Teams in a different way?
I think it's a double-edged sword. So I think one thing that it did do, especially in the early days of COVID and early days of remote working, was it leveled the playing field a little bit in terms of the fact that everybody could see before Zoom backgrounds came on and before everything got blurred out. Everybody could see the dog in the background and the ironing board, and
we're in the same boat.
The garden wasn't mowed and all of those things. So to start with, it did level things out a little bit. But actually what we very quickly saw, we do a lot of work with marketing departments within large corporates. Those marketing departments were one of the first teams to get fired during COVID. And the fact that they were doing that firing remotely almost gave them that insular view of it. And people were just getting fired literally over Zoom with very, very short notice, just completely heartlessly. And it was a horrible situation for an awful lot of people. So, the pros and cons of this whole thing, right?
And you remind me of, again, there's been some infamous situations where that's happened, where the CEO or boss has come on and said, you're fired, and it's been captured. It's, as you said, it probably is just aggravated in a different way, a nasty behavior like that in an organization, because I said you're kind of isolated from it, you're insular, which I'd never thought about until I started hearing about it recently, which I thought was strange. Interesting to see, again, the change in either politics or demographics or things like that, or not. It's just it's just a mirror copy of maybe the office space in a different way. But separately, we did find a lot of people continued learning during the pandemic. They had nothing to do. They didn't know what to do and work. 59-60% of people said they did continue learning, mostly online because classroom bases were closed. Dave, I'll start with you. Did you do any online learning over that period or not?
Yes and no.
Even that 59%.
I do most of my learning at conferences and by meeting people and talking.
Yes. And they were online conferences, I take it.
Yeah, and they sucked, to be perfectly honest, to start with. They're getting better, but I think, they weren't an optimal environment. Again, people moved the conference environment to a virtual environment without changing it, and it just didn't work. It got better. So I would say that I stopped learning probably from about 6 months into COVID.
That's interesting. So they took the physical conference, and I've seen this myself because they have been in the same boat. They've taken the physical way they've done the conference, moved it online without changing it for online, and expected something new to happen, expected you to be engaged, and actually turned you off either the conference or the learning experience that you get from these conferences, which is amazing. Elaine, probably similar to, and I won't brush all academics with this, but some academic organizations trying to move online, but not changing their engagement, like you said earlier on. You've now lost Dave as a student there, model student. You've now turned him into a truant at the end of the day. So half in, half out. Elaine, yourself, did you do any online learning with all these great portals that popped up? Well, you're in academia, so you probably did.
I did. Mark, knowledge for me, it's like a drug. It's really bad. I try to stop myself and I don't know how. And I can tell you that things are getting better. I agree with Dave. I got so many invitations to conferences that I, at the beginning, will say yes. And then I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. There is no way I can attend so many conferences. But I can tell you that in the past months, I've seen the difference. They are creating more space for networking and collaboration. They are creating more breakout rooms where you can submit the topics you want to talk about. I just finished a certificate program on digital marketing because I decided that was the next thing I wanted to learn. And so for me, it's an ongoing thing. It never ends. It's part of who I am. I'm a student forever.
So let me say, Mark, before you tar me with that brush of not learning anything for the last 18 months, I've changed the way that I learn now, though. I listen to an awful lot of audiobooks while I'm walking the dog that I never would have got a chance to do if I was in the office in the first place.
I have heard that from people that they've got into podcasts or audio as a way, and a lot more. I've even heard from conferences now that they stopped giving out brochures and all this. They'll give you an audio of some case study or something that you can consume that way. That seems to be good. Even from, I think, a learning perspective, Elaine, in academia, there's something to be said there. We learn when we listen as well. So maybe lecturing via podcast is something that's starting to come out. So Dave, okay, we'll put you back in that 59%, and Elaine, you're fully in there. But Elaine, within that 59% that said they continued learning, where do minorities sit? As you said, do they have access to that type of online learning? In your experience, are they excluded? As you said, they don't have broadband, don't have laptops, and then even is there a cost perspective here, or is there that I'm not good enough perspective? Is all that thrown in? Are minorities kind of left behind in that space?
Unless we are actively networking and connecting with others, we are going to stay behind. Besides the technology issue and the fact that a lot of us don't have access to a powerful computer. But I can tell you that the good news is that there are so many companies and groups online that understand this is happening. And for example, this scholarship that I received for this course came from a group called, I forgot the name right now, but I think it's Latinas in Tech. And so you have a lot of groups like that, Tequeria, Latinas in Tech, Tribaja, and they're offering a lot of free resources to minorities. The problem, I think, is that a lot of people don't know that the resources exist. So how can we make sure that they know if they don't even have a LinkedIn account, a lot of them, or they don't have access to friends who can guide them, and they don't have access to a mentor? And that's one of the reasons I spend a lot of time every month mentoring others, because we have to find a way to make sure that the information makes it their way, and it doesn't all the time.
I think it's an interesting viewpoint there, and to try how do we improve that, how do we make that better. How do you get better access to information? We saw digital age is all about information, and now we're struggling. There's so much of it. We're struggling to find that information. We found that 52% of those that we spoke to said within the next 3 years, and we mentioned some of this earlier, some part of the organization will have fundamentally changed the way because of digital technologies. But I was again thinking about that impact on change on some minorities, about can they adapt, are they adequately supported in their learning experiences? And I think, Elaine, you're saying it's kind of a mixed bag. It's a yes and a no situation. Are organizations moving too fast with all this change for every cohort in the organization to adapt, do you think?
I think some of them are. And I think that something that we need to keep in mind, and I see some companies are already doing that, is creating a budget so that we can support them at home, giving them the internet access that they need, or sending the second monitor that I have the huge privilege of having, and it makes my work easier because I'm a visual person and I can work better when I have two of them. A lot of minorities don't have access to that. And so I'm going to put that on the companies to make sure that there is a budget created now so that I can say, what do you need moving forward? Do you need a cell phone? Do you need a second monitor? Do you need a computer? Let's make sure that you have the tools you need now that you're working from home. And not only that, I'm paying for my own internet. So how will I be compensated for that? So I think it's a switch in mentality. I think it's going to take a while for companies to understand all of this, but I see some of them already starting.
And I would like to think that there might be a switch to support that in accounting policies, because if you don't have people in an office, you're going to save that money. Surely allocate some of that to the home workers. I know they'll want to siphon some of it off for better profits and all that kind of stuff, but surely there's a percentage that can be siphoned off to support the home workers, whatever shape, form, or whatever, and encourage them to prosper. I think, I think that's interesting. And Dave, I think going back, we found another 22% in that area found there'd be no change after digital, but you said they'll be out of business. So I think we know where you stand on that sense.
Yeah, I think shocker. This is a spoiler alert. There is change coming. It might not be digital transformation for you guys, but it's going to be slightly bigger and more impactful for you. You're going out of business.
It's like when we spoke to Aid there previously as well, where he said that's kind of 20th century mindset thinking in a 21st century environment, that's going to get you nowhere. I think that's the place we're in. We're going to finish up now, but we did get some feedback. I thought this was a nice one, relevant to what we're looking at today. And some feedback in the report is to develop and retain talent, organizations are going to need the right blend of coaches, consultants, and trainers. Going back to a little bit what we've mentioned there, tailored to their specific needs. There's quite a lot in that. The crucial part is to understand the different values each of these tools, the consultant, the trainer, the mentor, provide, and how best to utilize them in developing their staff. And with that, Elaine, I think I know the answer, but are we reaching everybody throughout the organization with the right blend of coaching, mentoring, training, and these types of skills? Or are we just finding that those with the higher position or with the loudest voice can get some of that access to some of those resources while everybody else doesn't? What's your view?
Yeah, you gave us the answer, Mark. And usually what happens is that we tend to listen to the loudest voice, even if what they're saying is meaningless. It doesn't matter. And something that's important to mention, especially in my culture, is that we are very shy. We are very respectful. We don't speak up sometimes because we don't want to get too much attention. And we are raised being told that from our parents. Get in the room, sit quietly, don't raise your voice. And it's not helping. I've spent a few years unlearning a lot of the things that I learned growing up from my parents, because that's all they knew, right? And so they were teaching me what they knew. But when I got into the workplace, I realized that it was actually hurting me. As a woman and being raised in the Dominican Republic, I always knew I needed to respect anyone who was older than me. Right. And so when I started to manage people older than me, I had to change my mindset and understand that, yes, I could be respectful, but yes, we have a mission and we need to get things done. And so for a lot of cultures, this is a big challenge because we were raised thinking otherwise, and now we're going to an environment where you need to fight for yourself and you need to speak up. And when you have the annual review, you need to bring a list with you so that you can share what your goals are, not the goals of the university, of the company, but what are your goals? What are you expecting to get? And what are your expectations from this manager, this person who is supporting you? And that's a huge shift in mindset. And it's taking a while for a lot of us to understand that we are empowered. Actually, the power came back to the employee, especially after the pandemic. We can ask for all the things we want, but it's going to take a while because, there is so much conditioned thinking that we grow up hearing, and even in television and movies. And so it's taken a while for us to understand that we do have a voice, and when we use it, it actually works.
That's it. We have it. Yeah. I think it's often forgotten about the cultural aspect on what what you're brought up in. But as you said, we have to unlearn that. It's probably one of the hardest things we're going to have to try and learn. And yeah, Dave, and that cultural aspect as well. Do you see a big player of that? We've got to unpick our sometimes cultural, I won't call it biases, but our cultural upbringings for the environments that we're in.
Yeah, I think we do. And I think that what we've seen over the past 18 months with this great resignation, with the shift to much, much smaller businesses, that's a big reason for doing that, right? People are voting with their feet.
Yeah.
Because it's hard for larger organizations to make those changes. It's hard for large organizations to innovate. It's hard for them to change processes, like turning an oil tanker.
Yeah.
It happens very, very slowly.
Yeah.
But
yes.
I think that the good news is that actually the willingness is there in the majority of organizations now. There's a realization that actually it's time to start steering because we got to do something.
Yeah.
That's the key, right? Until people want to make a change, they're not going to be able to make a change. But first step is wanting it. And I think we're seeing that first step more and more.
And as you said at the start of our discussion earlier, you said it's easier to buy the technology, easier to buy the machine and stick it in the factory. Now we've got to absolutely change everything else, how we work and how we work personally to be able to operate this new machine. Our new machine is all these digital services today. So interesting. And I think just thinking there, an organization doesn't change unless its people changes. I think we sometimes forget that we need a mass of people in the organization to change to turn that tanker around, to turn that organization around. Or as you said, it will stay on the course to oblivion. Or as Aid once says, it's a cheaper, faster, quicker Titanic, but we know what happened in that story. To finish with, I'll ask you both, but David, I'll start with you. From your experience, do you see people need to learn differently and at different speeds and different ways? But do companies get that, or do they think it's a one-size-fits-all type learning experience should cover everybody?
It's a work in progress. I'm going to put a positive slant on this to finish the session today.
Great.
Again, they're not there. There is an appreciation, I think, that people learn in different ways.
Yeah.
How much that appreciation is translated into different types of learning and different assets and the ability for people to actually consume those training materials in different ways, we're nowhere near delivering that, in my opinion. Yeah. But again, back to what I said a few minutes ago, I think the willingness and the desire is there to do that now. We get why we need to do it. It's just a matter of putting it in place.
It's now moving into execution stage. And then Elaine, the same question to you, seeing as you're in that kind of helping the execution of this. Are you seeing as well in university that people are now needing to learn different ways and different ways? And is academia standing up to that now in what they can do, or are they still, as Dave said, we recognize it, but we've yet to figure out how to change it? Where's academia in that, please?
We're actually getting there. We already have a lot of virtual programs in CUNY, and we have a new initiative for an even bigger program for virtual learning. And so I'm happy to see that they see what's coming. But something else I want to mention, I think that, I read a lot of research where they talk about the future of tech, and everybody's saying the future of tech is AI, the future of tech is virtual reality. In my opinion, the future of tech is human. And I think the sooner we see that, the sooner we focus on compassionate leadership, the sooner everything else will flow. Because when people feel seen, they want to do more for you. When people feel appreciated, they want to come into the office. They want to stay late. And I think we're not getting that as fast as I wish we could, but there is progress, and we'll end it in a happy note.
I think that's fantastic to end on. As you said, the future is human. It is people. And all these digital things are just tools. Going back to your 20%, Dave, that's 20% of the story. 30% is how we do it. And 50% or more is us, the people. And again, for that recognition in organization, in ourselves, in everywhere, just I think that's the relevance of it all. Elaine, David, we're up on time. This has been fascinating conversation again today, and I really thank you for coming back to overlay today's conversation with some of those findings that we found, and then to add more of your insights, your experiences, again covering before pandemic, during and after pandemic as well, because we've seen a massive amount of change through that as well. So the last thing we have to say is, Elaine and Dave, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll talk soon. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye.